Hello. So briefly, I'll start with a trigger warning. This talk will touch on mental health issues and suicide. So who is this guy? Now, I know what you're all thinking, and you're right. It has been a long time since you last saw Captain Caveman. So I'm Mike, and I'm going to talk to you about my journey from a stalled career in logistics to a career in tech with a detour through a significant mental breakdown. I'm going to discuss some of the issues I had to navigate along the way and other driving puns. So a bit about me: I picked up playing field hockey before I left primary school. I settled into playing in goal soon after, so that way you know I've got a screw loose. I was involved in D-Side's local music scene back in the MySpace era before Tom pieced out and nobody tried to sell you a blue tick for $8. Like many people my age, my first coding experience was HTML into my MySpace. At 17, I met my now wife on the bus to college and bonded over a love of music. After years into the relationship, we decided it would be good if I had a proper job with a steady income so that we could move in together. So I swallowed a difficult pill to swallow, accepted that none of my bands would ever make it and that I would have to get some boring, crappy job over an enjoyable one. I managed to land a job working in a warehouse loading vans with their deliveries. The shift started in the small hours of the morning, typically 4 a.m, but would flex as early as 2 a.m. in the busy periods. After a few months of that, someone on the evening shift called in sick and I put my hand up to cover that. And that shift consisted of unloading the collections and loading them onto trailers destined for the hubs. And that ran from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. So now I had a split shift. I would commute on a bike. And I'm not going to tell you it was uphill both ways in the snow, but commuting 4 times a day sucks, especially when it snowed. And I don't know if you've ever had to defrost a push bike, but frozen brake cables don't make for an enjoyable commute. After doing that for about 3 years, I was shipped off to the training school to become a delivery driver. Something of a promotion, a bump in pay, and a lie-in. After being a cover driver for any route, I eventually got given a route when I outperformed the regular driver while he was off on holiday. And after 6 years on that route, I was on a first name basis with most of the customers. Half my route had my phone number, and it just became really useful when a small independent business could drop me a text and say, look, the collection's booked for 4, but can you leave it till a bit later? We're running a bit behind. And that kind of gesture just made everybody's lives easier. After a few years at this, it really started to grind me down. When the pandemic hit, we were praised by the public for helping deliver medical goods to hospitals and to patients who were being cared for at home, as well as taking care of any other retail needs when bricks and mortar was closed. The delivery volume was higher than Christmas and over a longer period. It was really difficult to go along with all the uncertainty, to be working 60 hours a week, to have such a high demand and so many people counting on me to make those deliveries, and then to throw on top of that the expectation that we would somehow homeschool our kids. I remember the first time I caught COVID was before testing was publicly available. And I had every symptom. I felt terrible. I called in sick. My boss asked me if I was taking the piss. I took 4 weeks to recover. For a couple of months afterwards, I could still feel my heart, working extra hard if I had to push a trolley or if I had heavy packages or lots of them. And for those 4 weeks I took off, I was on statutory sick pay because sick pay at the company was at manager's discretion. I knew I needed to escape this kind of job, and I knew I was capable of more. I've got a handful of friends who took the academic route through university with some computer science degree and landed a well-paying, fulfilling role as a developer or DevOps or security analytics. And here I was driving a van. So after a particularly dreadful week in work, I reached out to the group chat, fellas, are there any apprenticeships in tech? I was steered towards a boot camp that one of them knew, based in central London, called Makers. Makers entry requirements was a handful of freely available courses on Codecademy, learn Ruby, that kind of thing. And I set to work on it, courting the idea of going to a boot camp. By the time I'd finished the Ruby course, I'd spotted that makers offered a level 4 apprenticeship, but this came with an entry exam. And as daunting as that may be, to have the opportunity for the cost of the bootcamp to be covered and to be earning from day one was just incredibly appealing. So I passed the exam, and I did well enough in the interview that I was accepted into the pool of apprenticeship candidates. One thing that's worthy of note is that on the application form under desired work location was a drop-down menu that had all of the regions in England. Wales, no. Scotland, nothing. Ireland, nothing. Sorry. So I leapt on the closest job offer they had, which was Leeds. I was selected for an interview, but I was rejected based on how far the commute would be. The job posting said 1 to 2 days a week in the office, but at the interview they explained that would actually be 3. I felt like I did really well in the interview, and when I got the feedback I was ruled out specifically on the distance to travel, which felt like such a kick in the teeth, especially when I was already driving 800 miles a week. I'd worked out the distances, the times, factored in the traffic and the cost of parking. All of these considerations were made, and given the work-life balance that I had at the time, even with this kind of commute, I still would have been better off taking the job in Leeds. I spent nearly a year in the Makers Apprenticeship pool, long enough that I had to redo my tech test and interview, all the while taking a tablet to work that I would spend my lunch break solving Code Wars puzzles on, hoping that something would come up. At one point, I made a point of asking if there were any job openings that were outside the M25, and I was pointed towards the role they had open in Oxford. Getting rejected from that job was a real kick in the teeth, and what followed was a very steady spiral into a deep depression. At every step of the way, I was in denial, lying to myself that it'll be okay, I just need to get through this week and next week could be better. When my employer caught wind of the interview and my intention to leave, there was a panic. I was the only driver who could reliably work on that route, and every time I had a holiday, they struggled to meet the requirements of the customers. Instead of being used to train someone else on that route, I was just removed from it entirely, and then had to deal with the phone calls of customers baffled at the sudden drop in service. And in the space of the next few weeks, I spent a couple of £1,000 trying to keep my car running, eating into my precious quitting my job fund. I had to contend with never playing hockey again over an eye injury that could lead to blindness if I did. I went through 2 rounds of a skin cancer scare. I had to pick my mum up off the floor after she'd had a fall, all the while getting flashbacks of seeing my dad in hospital when he was terminally ill. And then the next day I tested positive for COVID and had to wonder whether or not I'd just passed it on to my mum. I felt so deeply stressed and anxious that my jaw hurt from clenching it 24/7. I was getting no rest, no sleep. I felt so low, so down, so worthless. The comedian Ramesh Ranganathan has talked about his struggles with depression, and he said that he didn't want to take his own life, but he fantasized about a time where he didn't feel like this, he didn't feel depressed. And you just have to do the one thing that you really don't want to do, which is talk to somebody. With 12 stitches in my arm from having another mole removed, I called work to let them know that I wouldn't be going in. I'd be taking some time off. I contacted my GP, who helped greatly in the form of pastoral reassurance and some medication. With a lot of support from my wife, I contracted the services of a therapist and found my way to a men's mental health group called Andy's Man Club. Andy's Man Club, simply put, seeks to dispel this idea that men need to man up, and aims instead to get men to open up. What followed was a very difficult journey out of an incredibly dark place. Much soul searching was done, many reflections were reflected upon, and I decided to stop waiting around for a London-based boot camp to offer me an apprenticeship outside of London and get cracking on a new plan. I found North Coders, who are based in Manchester, set to work on an application there. The entry exam was along the lines of 15 JavaScript puzzles to solve in the space of an hour, with the expectation that you wouldn't finish, but you'd have a good shot at it, followed by a call with a tutor. I finished every puzzle with 2 minutes to spare, and I was offered a scholarship, a free ride. Oh wait, you live in Wales? Oh, so education is a devolved power, and this scholarship was only available with the Department for Education, England. Despite every bump along the way, I made the scary decision to leave a job where I'd been for 12 years. And people ask me how scary it was, but I think it was nowhere near as scary as staying where I was. So there are a few reasons I wanted to give this talk. One of the reasons is that for anyone looking to break into this industry via a bootcamp, there's usually a video of a day in the life of a junior developer. And it'll go something like this, right? Wake up and breakfast is like porridge and something healthy and some fruit, and you take the dog to walk and you listen to an audiobook, and then you start work and they just stop talking about what it is to be a developer. And then they take some lunch and they do some yoga and some meditation, and then they go back to work and stop talking about what it's like to be a developer. And if you're in that video, if you've recorded one for your bootcamp, cool, but I still have no idea what it's like to be a developer. I started at North Coders in May 2023, and I've been working as a developer since September. I've learned a whole bunch of useful things along the way, and some of them have even been related to software development. As developers, we feel like we're under a lot of pressure a lot of the time. Under pressure to develop a solution, or to repair a bug, or to fix an outage. And while in that moment, and for a long time afterwards, the pressure can feel incredible. And this tension and this stress and this sense of urgency can get in the way of how we communicate with each other. And if you don't believe me, watch what happens when someone is in the middle of trying to fix a bug and their laptop decides to install some updates, or their connection drops. And a lot of the time, pressure can bring out the worst in people. So in 2009, a US Airways flight 1549 suffered multiple bird strikes almost immediately after takeoff, and lost all engine power with 155 people on board and no working engines. That's pressure. The recording and transcript of the communication between the cockpit and the control tower is some of the best communication you will ever hear. I implore all of you to go and listen to it. There's no fat on the dialogue. The essential information is there, without fluff, without panic, without anger. They simply say, I can get you this runway. We can't, we may end up in the Hudson. And the tower doesn't quite understand the captain. He says, okay, well, it's going to be this runway, head there. Unable. There is no fat in it. That is exactly what it needs to be, and nothing more. He's busy trying to safely ditch a plane with no engines into an icy river. He's not pissy, he's not snappy. He just conveys his message in a clear and effective manner. In aviation, there are three principles in order: aviate, navigate, communicate. The events of the flight were the basis of a plot for the 2016 film Sealey, Miracle on the Hudson, with Tom Hanks playing Captain Sullenberger. And who better to star in the film than the man who survived plane crash in Castaway, hijacking of a container ship, and Captain Phillips, and D-Day Northern France in Saving Private Ryan. The old adage of don't use two words when one will do could simply be refactored as superfluous words detract. It's difficult to overstate the importance of clear and concise communication. The level of safety in modern aviation, without question, is thanks to the regulatory bodies who perform incredibly detailed investigations on incidents such as this one, and report their findings publicly and make changes where necessary. Which brings me on to my next point. Self-evaluation is an incredibly important skill. But until you park your ego at the door, it's absolutely useless. It's useless because it often uncovers the root cause of an issue to be oneself. It would be really easy to go through life denying all the blame, or even saying that you did the best that you possibly could, but until you really get into it, there's no conviction in a statement like that. It carries no weight. When I was in my 20s playing field hockey in goal, I realized quickly that the most experienced goalkeeping coach and the most experienced goalkeeper at the club was me. I could make an error, I could make a bad decision, and nobody would hold me accountable. Not many people would spot the mistake. They would spot the result and have to pick the ball out the back of the net, but the cause that led to the failure would go largely unnoticed. Over a beer in the clubhouse, After a match, I was catching up with one of the other teams at our club who played in a different division. And I, of course, was swapping war stories and giving a play-by-play of a 3-1 victory. Their goal was a screamer, I said. I couldn't have done anything about it. And my friend, who I had just bought a beer, said, "Is that true, or is that just what you're telling yourself?" And so I stewed over it for a bit. And despite coming away with 3 points, I couldn't escape that question. So I looked over the videos from the match over and over again. And while the goal was a great one, I'd have been pleased to have scored that goal. And I'm sure their striker sat in their clubhouse bragging about it. It was ultimately preventable. I hadn't managed my defenders well enough. My ready stance was sloppy. Had my hands been higher by default, I would have stood a better chance of saving it. And had I managed my defence better, I might not have even needed to have faced the shot. Being honest with yourself in self-evaluation can be difficult because the only productive outcome results in blame being laid at your own feet. It's something we see in software development a lot, most often in post-mortem analysis or incident reports, and the classic example is, "It works on my machine," where you just shift blame to someone else. When actually the result of the work is something that doesn't work. It could be that your unit tests haven't got enough coverage, or it could be that your styling isn't adjustable or flexible, and the end result is the work you've done just doesn't meet the grade, and "it works on my machine" just isn't a defense. Evaluate your own performance and make improvements. Social capital. Now, what in the wankonomics, middle management, marketing, corporate speak is social capital? So it's almost like your value, right? It's more like the kind of the weight of your words or your actions. Social capital can also be expressed as political capital or social credit, and it boils down to how much people will give a crap when you talk. And it can almost be expressed as a currency, right? So everyone's familiar with The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and everyone knows someone who always has something to complain about. And we respond by just caring less. Having just completed a boot camp, I know that I'm a nobody in this field. And why should anybody listen to me? I have very little social capital. And with that in mind, if I see an issue, how should I raise it? Is it even worth raising? How much social capital will it cost me to raise? Can I afford it? If you walked into a furniture showroom and complained about there being a mess on the floor or marks on the furniture, you may have a valid complaint. But if you walked into a carpentry workshop and started shouting about sawdust and pencil marks, you'd be told where to go. So joining a team with apps still in the development pipeline isn't like walking into the showroom. It's like walking into the workshop. So how do I know what's a pencil mark that's going to get taken care of or will end up on display? That is a trickier one. But the bigger and more obvious the problem, the more seriously it should be taken. Be willing to spend social capital. If the border radius doesn't match on the text input fields, who cares? But if it's something more serious than that, it should be given more weight. So here's the scenario, right? I'm working on a ticket and I go to log into the app in the development environment and I'm excited to see my changes. And rushing to type my credentials in, I mistyped my own email address. It's still a valid email address, but for some reason I'm not getting the green tick. There's no positive validation. So I played around with it a little bit, put in a bunch of different email addresses, A@B, hello@goodbye.com, valid emails, probably owned by someone somewhere, but I didn't get a green tick validation. And then the penny dropped. So I put my email address in all nice and carefully, and a green tick. And I was able to figure out which of my colleagues had used which emails to register through a couple of minutes of trial and error. This field validation is not checking to see if the email is valid, it's checking to see if it's registered, and then showing a green tick to the user if it was. This is bad. This is more than a pencil mark left on a piece of furniture. It's not an unsanded surface. This is more like we've left our own paperwork in the top drawer of the dresser. I promise I'm going to retire the wood workshop metaphor. This is worth spending capital on. It's also something I had to be sure to get right. So I looked at the input field in the code base, and sure enough, we were displaying validation based on the email existing in our database. And now it's not just an inkling, it's not just a feeling. I'm not disagreeing with the product manager on matters of style or taste. This is objectively vulnerable. It falls under something called valid target enumeration attacks, meaning someone can figure out with a bit of automation and not too much difficulty every email address registered in our database. And armed with that information, they can then narrow down their targets for phishing attacks, which nicely becomes something called spear phishing. And they could also use those emails to check for passwords in known breach databases. So I'm going to spend some social capital. I don't want to ruffle feathers. I don't want to name and shame. One thing I learned in therapy was to stick to facts, not feelings. Amazon's principal engineering tenets include respect what came before. Principal engineers are grateful to our predecessors. We appreciate the value of working systems and the lessons they embody. We understand that many problems are not essentially new. So quietly and without fanfare, without a name and shame nor any finger pointing, I ping my line manager a message. This is happening. I don't think it's the right approach. Here's why it's dangerous. You can read more about it here. Here's how I think it should work. And if I'd griped and groused about every little piece of sawdust or pencil mark or border radius, if I'd cried wolf at every opportunity, by the time that it mattered, nobody would have cared enough to listen. But by saving social credit until it mattered, meant that when I raised an issue, it got noticed. As a junior developer, whether you're looking for your first break into tech or you've just landed your first role, nobody's expecting you to know much in the grand scheme of things. You should have a solid understanding of the basics, and you should have a handful of portfolio projects, but more than that, you should have the desire to learn. And it'd be super easy to coast through life doing what we already know, but that's not how we learn. We learn by being challenged and stretched just to the point of discomfort. Calm seas never made a good sailor. One of the first tickets I picked up as a bill-paying, gainfully employed developer was simply swapping out the old logo for the new logo on an app. And it was a straightforward one, but it gave me an opportunity to get some hands-on experience with the code base and the file structure and the layout of the app. And a couple of months ago, I was working on a simple ticket to do with the styling of the emails that we send out from this app. It'd be like submitted request or reviewed request, and it'd fire off to the customer or the sales team, depending on which direction the interaction was going. And at this time, we didn't have a way of manually triggering these emails, only to log in as a user and submit the request, and then log out and log in as an admin and review this request, and that would trigger the email. And I thought there's got to be a better way of doing this. So I went a little bit off the ticket, and I thought, well, let's find a way. I tried to build one, and I fumbled through it, and I encountered many error messages, and eventually, after chipping away at them all, I had a working tool to use to manually trigger these emails without having to go the long way round. And when you're pixel tweaking, when it's literally a matter of tweak it, try it, not quite, but with emails and you have to go that long way around, it's more time consuming than anybody would probably like to admit. So I added an email address, text input field, and a button for each of the emails that we could see, and it made it so much more simple. And the curiosity to see that it could be done, and the desire to find a better way, and the enthusiasm to make something better for every developer on the team. And having finished that ticket, during testing, someone remarked that actually one of the other emails that wasn't included in that ticket also had a similar styling issue. And my first thought was, oh, get lost. It's not on the ticket. And then I thought, well, actually, I've just built the tool that makes this a 30-second job instead of a 30-minute job. So I just put my money where my mouth was and went and fixed that one as well. So some further reading on mental health. The Ramesh Ranganathan podcast is it's an episode with the Surface podcast with Calm, which is the campaign against living miserably. I am now a facilitator of Andy's Man Club. I wholeheartedly recommend it. That's available for any man over the age of 18. And it would be daft not to include those and leave out things like Samaritan, Shout, and if you're in Wales, you can use 111 option 2. Communication. The Miracle on the Hudson was covered by a great YouTuber who deals with all kinds of aviation evaluation. Of course, there's the film. And then if you fancy a laugh, don't listen to it in the office if you're in a strict office. Wankonomics is a thing on YouTube where they explain about circling back and drilling down and low-hanging fruit and all of that kind of nonsense. Self-reflection, this is my favourite bit. So, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth from Commander Chris Hadfield. I think he was possibly the most prolific captain of the ISS and spent a great deal of time in outer space reflecting on what it's like to be a human on Earth, right? His thing was like sweat the little stuff, which is occasionally something that can be difficult to get yourself out of, especially at 2 a.m. when you're going over that argument that you lost and you've really got her on the ropes 3 days later in your head. But he discusses how he kind of sets out every possible eventuality and makes a plan for that. And when you're doing a space walk or something like that, that's incredibly important. One thing he discussed though was that he, while he was aboard the ISS, he would play his guitar and stream that back to Earth, which is quite cool. But he was going to an event that Elton John was playing at, and Elton John was excited to meet him, and he said, well, what if Elton John asks me to get up on stage? What if he wants me to play a song with him? Well, it's obviously going to be Rocket Man, so he spent the next week learning how to play Rocket Man, just in case. And I admire that. But granted, it could be something that's a little bit difficult to switch off. The other one is Extreme Ownership, which is a great book. I listened to it as an audiobook. It's written by 2 Navy SEAL commanders, lieutenants, high up, and I listened to it as an audiobook, and they sound exactly like people who have spent 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. But they talk about how the discipline and the planning before anything made things so much better and safer. And I think it's another example of you have to get this right because there will literally be something to try and kill you. We're software developers, that's not necessarily the case, but it is a very good example of bringing things back to, could I have done any better? Did I do everything right? So well worth it. And if you go and look them up, they look exactly like Navy SEALs as well. Enthusiasm and curiosity. So I would spend probably 10, 12 hours a day behind the wheel listening to this podcast. It's a phenomenal resource. They've had such a wealth of guests, including from the top end, kind of anybody who's anybody, a big name, but also people who have been in the post for like 3 months, a bootcamp graduate, and exploring how people find their way. It's such a wealth of knowledge. Yeah, I say at the bottom there, the best part of it is because it's a podcast, you can listen to it while doing something else, like driving a van in a job that you hate. The picture from the event tonight, and the opening slide was me on my lunch break in the van solving Code Wars puzzles, because I knew all the way along that it was just driving the van was kind of this interim, and anything I could do while driving the van or while stuck in the van that might help me get out of the van, I would do it, right? That's how determined I was, and I wouldn't buy a laptop at the time because that would have eaten into my quitting my job fund. So I had that tablet and a full-size keyboard and mouse on a USB dongle, because that's what I had to do, and that's kind of how I got here, right? I've been in post now for 5 months, and that's what I feel is worth knowing about my time. But I'll answer any questions you have about any topic, honestly.
Well, thank you very much. Anyone got any questions?
What's next?
In career?
Yeah, you've had 5 months of being a junior developer.
That's a good question. I've been asked in a couple of interviews where I'd like to see myself in 5 years' time, and I think I normally say that I'd like to be the one to go to on a particular topic. I don't know if that would be like a feature or even a specific app. My wife works she works for a bank marking the people who mark the calls when they say calls are recorded and monitored for training purposes. And the amount of times that she gets a call from someone she's never met, and they go, everybody I asked about this said, come and speak to you. I think I'd like to have that, although I'm not sure necessarily that I'd love having to fend questions off. I think I prefer just to get my head down and actually do the developer work. Career-wise, what's next? Who knows? Who knows? Sure.
So, you spoke to a lot of people who do done a similar journey to yourself. Of all the different careers you could go into from what you were doing, what brought you into development?
I think as long as I can remember, there's been a computer in the house. We're going back to the point of it being a word processor. My dad was a financial advisor and wrote all of his correspondence in pencil, and then would get my mum to type up the letters and would print them out and post them. And so there has always been a computer in the house. I can remember having the demo for Driver, the driving game Driver, and being able to look into the text files and edit some of the values in there to get a different car, even though it was only a demo. So there's always been this kind of, how does it work under the hood? What happens if I change this? I had a few false starts, even more than that. I think I've always known that I was definitely capable of driving, well, doing more than just driving a van. I kind of fell into it, and for a long time it was suitable. Starting a family and buying a house and all of these like grown-up things, and then I kind of thought, well, no, this can't be all that's left. I think around my 30th birthday, there was a driver who was retiring in his early 60s, and he'd been there for 37 years, and he looked great for 85. He was used, he was spent, and I thought, I've got to find a way out of this. What's something that I might feel more comfortable in? I've got a handful of friends who are already in the field, so I can go, hey, how do I? And none of them would go, well, it's this. They'd go, well, have you tried looking here? And none of them would give me the answer that swines. But it's always been something that's kind of been on my radar, and discussing it with friends who are already in that field. They all kind of went, yeah, you could do that. I'd meet people who would be scared of a computer. You know, you turn the monitor off to prank them and they think they've lost all their work. But I I've kind of always been comfortable around computers and always been comfortable to twiddle something, see what it breaks and see what happens. So I think that way. Sure, the back.
Sorry, I was a bit late. You might have covered this already, but how did you get your first gig from your boot camp to
So, excuse me. So how did I get my first job? Through the boot camp, everything was portfolio based and lots and lots of here's something you can show off when you go there. And one of the reasons I went to the boot camp was specifically for a curriculum. Rather than going, well, I know some JavaScript because I've done some puzzles in the van. You know, being able to say, well, now I have an understanding of databases and APIs and that kind of thing. And throughout the boot camp, it was always geared up to, and this is what you will take towards a job interview. There was a jobs board and careers advisors who were fantastic, and there were job postings, some of which appealed to me and some didn't, but I always feel like if you're going to apply for a job, you've got to do it properly. You shouldn't be sending out 100 job applications in a day. You should find the one that you like and figure out what it is that they do and what the tech stack is, and maybe think about looking into some of the problems that they might face. After the boot camp, I had 3 interviews, one a week, and the third one said yes. I went to the interview and they said, what do you know about this? And I said, well, I was playing around with it yesterday and here's what I built. And I think I might have been the only person that did that. There was a bit of a running joke with some of the students who, as soon as the job posting went live, they'd smash an application in. Didn't matter who they were, what it was. And I think people will fire off a job application without totally understanding it. But I made a point of like getting to grips with what the job actually was, rather than just firing off an application. But yeah, the careers team as part of the boot camp were great at that. And yeah, the mentors along the way. I was offered a mock interview, which was really good because I thought I'm confident in interviews. And then he asked me one question and I fell apart. And I thought, well, of course I'm going to be asked that. I need an answer for that. So yeah, there was a lot of support through the boot camp. And it was on the jobs board, but I think it was publicly available to apply as well.
Thank you. Cheers.
Got a question from YouTube. I enjoy the act of coding, but struggle to hold attention when reading documentation or books when learning. Do you have any tips on staying disciplined and not getting distracted when learning?
I think it's got to be project based. So if you actually have an end goal in mind and you run across a problem that way, then you've got this kind of, I need to overcome this hurdle, and once you're over it, you're away again, and you're past it, and you're back up to speed. And I think that's got to be the best way to learn is to actually run into these problems and try and solve them. As good as Code Wars was for learning syntax and array methods and that kind of thing, I think it needs to be encompassed into something broader, especially with the nature of things like Code Wars, where you get a working solution and you submit it. You might get to you then get a chance to look at other people's working solutions and you go, oh, I could have done it that way, and then you throw it away. You never look at it again. But if it's a portfolio and then it turns into a working project that you can then use and show off, and then somebody says, what about adding this feature? I think it's got to be the case that you run into these problems and have to solve them for your broader project, rather than just, here's one thing and it's a throwaway interaction. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a self-taught, so not coming from formal computer science education myself either. So I'm wondering, like, if you ever felt that when you're working with other people that are coming from formal education and then there's a particular topic, then they probably know it or learned it in an organized way, so they have a different and deeper knowledge, and have felt the urge to go deeper and eventually taking an unnecessary detour too deep in a certain topic.
Yeah, it's intimidating, right? And there's always going to be someone that knows more than you. There's always going to be someone that started coding when they were 4 and got a degree when they were 13 or something like that. There will always be more knowledge out there. When you find something you don't know, I think it's probably good enough just to kind of have a, kick the tires, slap the roof, have a look at it and kind of explore it a little bit. I'm not saying every time somebody says a word that you don't know, you should go and build a project in that. But I think it's certainly worthwhile taking a look and exploring why somebody might use that over something else, or what it brings to the table that you don't already have. And if it then actually you realize that it solves a problem that you have, then maybe it's worth going and building a project in something and properly getting to grips with it. But I think if every time somebody said, I use this tech stack or this technology, and you said, well, I must learn that as well, I think you'd never get out of the documentation. I think you'd just be snowed under it. Yeah, I think it's a case of balance and how much do you need it.
Yeah, I mean, I just mean but as a junior developer, it's very hard to make this judgment. So
Yeah.
do you have someone helping you, or?
Well, I've got a handful of friends who are already in established tech careers. So with that regard, it's like going to ask a big brother. Occasionally they'll go, oh, you don't need to worry about that. It's just this, but with extra steps, or something like that. I think the broader you can source opinions from, the kind of the more you can understand, is it worth learning, or is it just a phase or a fad, or actually is it something that I don't need or don't want? I think probably the most important thing is to have a good understanding of what's currently paying your bills. And beyond that, you should have a good understanding of what you want to pay your bills for that next job application. But yeah, realistically, I don't think it's worth trying to trouble yourself with learning everything. It just wouldn't happen. Sure.
What's something about being a software engineer that is surprising? Like you weren't expecting it.
Oh, good question. What is something about being a software developer that I wasn't expecting?
The hordes of fans that you went on stream.
Oh yeah, yeah, the fan club, people waving my flag and beating my drum. No, I honestly I don't know, and I don't think really that there are two jobs that you could say were the same. Everybody's team would be different, and tech stack, and everybody's learning environment. What is something about being a software developer that I didn't experience, that I didn't expect? I don't know. I think going from an incredibly physically demanding job, I don't think I properly grappled with how exhausting it would be to sit at a desk and have to use my head. Yeah.
Driving around in the van, you still have a lot of time on your hands to think about things. Do you think, how was it when you kind of finished the shift? Were you eager to get to do the tech? Were you thinking about it all day?
It depends. No 2 days in the van were the same. No air conditioning, no radio, no sat nav. So in the summer, I recorded a temperature of 45 degrees Celsius on a mercury thermometer. On a day like that, I was eager to go home and get in a cold bath. There would be days where I'd get halfway through a Code Wars puzzle and hit a wall, hit a roadblock, and then I would spend the next 5 or 6 hours chewing over why, and I'd have a light bulb moment, and I'd get home from work, and my wife would say, how was you? Out the way, try this. It depends, and I guess it would also depend on where in the week it was. You know, by Friday, I used to have a joke that I had Get Fat Friday because I was snacking so much to try and inspire a sugar rush to carry on with everything that I had to do. By Friday, do I want to go home and then sit at a desk and think about hard stuff? No, I want to go home and be horizontal. But I would also find that there were days when I think I'm having a terrible day, and if I go home and study, I will be out of this sooner. I can get away from it. So yeah, it was up and down and very much depended on the day. But yeah, eager to escape, but often battling with depleted energy levels as well.
Another online from Adam. Have you found you can apply any skills from your previous work in your new career? And he adds, I'm also currently working in logistics/warehouse.
So the company I work for is also in logistics in a slightly different fashion. And I remember within a day or two sitting in the office and hearing about our van tracking app that the customers would say, oh, it's an hour off, or he's over there and he's a mile away, or that kind of thing. That somebody said, well, why isn't that driver following the route that we've set out for them? And I thought, well, have we checked that it's the right order for the route? So mathematically, there's the travelling salesman problem, which is an NP problem, which is Latin for non prosequi, don't even bother, which is effectively you cannot know the most effective route between all of these stops, the shortest distance between all of these randomly dropped stops without working out every possible combination of them. And mathematically and academically, that's great, but it doesn't take into consideration there's traffic up the Welsh coast, or actually the stop that's nearest to me and would make most sense to do first was closed by the time you drive past after leaving the depot at that time. And so I was able to just kind of say, listen, I was a van driver, I did this for years. Are you sure you're expecting the right things of these drivers? There are a handful of things that that we do differently to where I was, and so I kind of don't necessarily have opinions or advice on them, but this route planning thing was the point where I could go, but have you made the right assumptions here before you go out swinging and saying the drivers are doing it wrong? Because if there's one thing a driver loves to do, sat in a cab on their own, is stew over stuff. So if you say, no, you must go here first, then it would just upset everybody, and for about a week there'd be missed deliveries or late, but by asking them to approach the drivers and say, have we got your route in the right order? Is this the right order? And then setting that to be what would appear on the driver's device as the order, and then we would tell the customers that that's the right order. By approaching it that way, that felt like the best route, excuse the pun, to tackle that problem.
Can I suggest two other possible skills that you talked about? So you were able to do your route faster than the guy before you. That's a problem solving skill potentially.
Sure.
Also, your communication skills with your customers is pretty rare. Well, not rare, that's unfair, but is less common in the developer community.
Yeah, I think doing that job certainly built confidence in social interactions. And I think it's a lot of fake it till you make it. And I would probably quite prefer just to go home and not interact with anybody and shut the curtains. That much is fine. But it definitely brought me out of my shell a bit more, and interacting with these customers. I had a customer who I'd deliver fabric to her in the morning, and in the evening I would collect curtains. And she'd text me at lunchtime and say, actually, no, I'm running really behind. Can you leave me till last? And as a little self-employed seamstress, I don't know if there's a gender neutral term, as a little employed fabric workshop, getting that kind of work out on time, you know, if she misses a day, maybe she misses the end of the month window, and then she has to wait until the next month to invoice or get paid for that order. So it makes a big difference to an individual like that. And that's something that's important to me, right? Because that kind of thing cost me 5 minutes. I'd go a slightly different way, or I'd get fuel before I'd go and see that customer to fill up the van. And just building, you know, spending 5 minutes, if we talk about social credit as a currency, spend your time as a currency. Spending 5 minutes built up a reputation with a customer that was enviable and is not being replicated by the person who got my route when I got taken off it.
Is it even worse than that? If they don't take into account their last minute needs, they're going to have failed collections and have to go twice?
So for me, when the collection would come through, it would come with a ready time and a close time, and the driver would go at any point between then.
Yeah.
And I think there may have been some kind of magnitude applied to customers where if you're just this small independent business, you get like a 5-hour window. You've got to be ready at 12, and if you close at 5, cool, whatever. But I could go at 12 within the kind of rules and to the letter of the law. I could mark that collection down as closed and run away. But who does that benefit? Because tomorrow I've got to collect twice as much, or it just means everything they're running is a day behind.
You've never got to collect from them again, because they're going to use another courier.
This is true. I had a collection from a small dental lab where they were making dental molds to be implanted into patients. And I got a message to say, look, we made an error while carving it, and then it didn't go into the oven until late. So we know exactly what time it's going to be ready, but you can't be here before then. And again, just doing everything else first. Right? The day that happened, I was snowed under anyway, because I had an extra chunk of residential deliveries to do. So I'd just go and do the residential deliveries because they're open later, and then I'd come back to a customer that would have closed at 5 o'clock, and the scanner's going mad in my pocket because it's going, hold on, you haven't done this. Just wait. Look, I'm a human being. This is a little bit more fluid than ready and close. And yeah, just building that kind of rapport. Like the owner of the dental lab loved me because the alternative was he got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and drove it across country to hand it to the dentist himself to be implanted in the patient at lunchtime. So me just, I went one way and then I came back on myself. It cost me 10 minutes. But spending those 10 minutes meant I had a better rapport with the customers, and it made everybody's lives easier. Fine?
I don't think we're very good at mental health in our industry. So, with your experience, and it's going to vary for everybody, what should we be looking out for?
So, sadly, software development and tech in general is male dominated. It sort of feels inevitable. I feel like the tide is changing a little bit, but as of right now, it's a male dominated industry. Suicide is the biggest killer of men under 45 in this country. It equates to 1 every 2 hours. It is a phenomenal issue that we don't like to talk about, and we do the very British thing and stiff up a lip and pull yourself together. And we kind of live in this culture where The only acceptable to, all right, mate, is, yeah, you. And you might not be. And you might not be. I would put on my customer service face and go and make my deliveries. And I was at a point in my life where I would drive between deliveries contemplating taking my own life. How we tackle that specifically in this industry, where I am now, we have you can sign up to do a coffee chat, and you get matched with somebody, anybody, and for half an hour, nobody can pester you, you just have a conversation. And it's nice to find someone with a different perspective, and sometimes it's nice just to have a chinwag and a brew. I think we could all do a better job of taking care of each other, just in general. Again, this isn't specific to software development. This is everybody. I think on an individual level, we should stick to facts, not feelings. QA haven't said this fails because they hate you. They've said it failed because it failed. That is a fact. They might also hate you, I don't know. But yeah, we should take better care of each other. We should make a point of being a bit more social with each other, especially working from home. It can be quite lonely, but then I know a lot of people who don't like going into the office, myself included. Take better care of each other. And I think the biggest thing for me is to consider things from someone else's perspective, and that other people might be fighting a battle you know nothing about. How people react to you is a reflection of them, not you. And so if somebody has snapped at you for something, it might be because they're having a bad day. It's not necessarily that you've done something wrong or bad. It might be that they're having a bad day. They might be going through something. They're probably going through something that they don't necessarily want to talk to you about. And they're kind of carrying all of that around. And you ask the wrong question at the wrong time, and then they snap. And it's not your question that's done it. It's everything else that they're carrying around. So I think everybody should be better at understanding that other people are fighting their own battles.
Got another online.
Go for it.
Adam, again, did you keep a strict schedule of learning around work full time?
No.
No, there is some mental fatigue.
No. No. I think it was more a case of, as much as I could feasibly, while still understanding the benefit of rest. If you are absolutely cream crackered at the end of a shift, you're going to miss a typo. You're not going to take it in. You're not going to properly understand what it is you're doing. And it's such a mentally challenging thing to do, and learning is such a mentally challenging thing. But driving and focusing on which car's going to try and accidentally run you off the road next is also a very mentally challenging thing. So if you have a good day and you can spare some time, go for it. But if you've had a rotten day and you just want to go home and be horizontal, don't beat yourself up about it. I think we should swap the expression of "I don't have time for this" with "it's not a priority." And after a good day at work, you can prioritize your learning, and after a bad day at work, rest is the priority.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.